Welcome to Sign Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice. From legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction, to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems, we explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Sign Facts, and step beyond the screen. Her voice stays steady, but there's no mistaking her resolve. Rambo isn't swayed. He tells her flatly to turn around and go home, where it's safe. Meanwhile, on the other side of the border in Burma, the war she's talking about is playing out in brutal detail. A military truck rolls to a stop in an open field, and soldiers force a group of civilians out at gunpoint. They're told to run. What they don't know or maybe do is that the field is seeded with landmines. Panic takes over as people scatter and sprint, some getting blown apart mid-stride, others cut down by gunfire before they even get the chance. Presiding over it all is Lieutenant Tint, watching the massacre unfold with total indifference, barking orders without a trace of hesitation. Back in Thailand, Sarah tries again. This time she catches Rambo mid-task, hammering metal. Absorbed in his work, she appeals to whatever conscience he has left, but he won't budge. His answer hasn't changed. He's not taking them. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Tint is leading a night raid on a village. Soldiers kick down doors and haul boys away from their screaming families to be conscripted. Anyone who fights back is met with violence. It's not chaos, it's a system, and it leaves nothing behind but fear. Night falls over Thailand, and rain starts hammering down. Rambo wraps up his work and steps outside to let it soak him. That's when he spots Sarah, sitting quietly in his boat, waiting for him. Confused, he asks why she hasn't left. This time she doesn't argue her case, she just asks him a straight question: why won't he help? Rambo finally lets his guard down, though not in the way she's hoping. He tells her that violence is baked into people, they just trap it in noble-sounding words like country or cause to make it more palatable. Underneath, it's all the same impulse. Taking her group into Burma, he says, would be nothing but walking them straight into a grave, and he wants no part of that. Sarah doesn't flinch. Before she walks away, she tells him something that sticks: if he really didn't care what happened to people, he'd have taken the job for the paycheck and never thought twice. The fact that he turned it down says otherwise. Doing the right thing matters, she tells him, even when you can't guarantee the outcome. Long after she's gone, the thought stays with him. By morning, Rambo has made up his mind. He'll take them. The group shoves off, heading upriver into Burma. Michael spends the trip trying to keep morale high, talking about the impact they're going to make. Sarah, meanwhile, drifts into conversation with Rambo, asking about his past, and something starts to form between them. Something quiet but unmistakable. Michael notices, and it clearly gets under his skin. At one point, Sarah mentions, almost in passing, that she and Michael are engaged, but she also admits something doesn't quite add up about Rambo. A man who claims to be done with people sure hasn't stopped moving toward them. Something is still driving him forward. As night falls again, they cross into Burmese territory. Lights flicker along the riverbank ahead at port. Rambo recognizes it instantly as pirate territory and tells everyone to go quiet and keep low. If they're lucky, they'll slide through unnoticed. They're not lucky. The pirates spot the boat and close in fast, surrounding them. Cornered, Rambo plays along, offering cash for safe passage. For a second it looks like it might actually work, until one of the pirates notices Sarah. Their intentions turn ugly fast. They want her. That's the moment everything breaks. Rambo doesn't hesitate. In seconds, he wipes out the entire group with brutal precision. The river goes quiet again, but there's no undoing what just happened. Michael is rattled. What he just watched contradicts everything he stands for, and he pushes to turn back, insisting the mission's too dangerous now. Sarah refuses. She holds firm, reminding everyone why they came in the first place. and once again talks Rambo into pressing on. The trip continues, but there's no going back now. By the next morning, the group reaches the drop-off point. Michael tells Rambo his part is done. From here, they're continuing on foot. There's a judgmental edge to his voice, still shaken by the pirate encounter. Sarah, though, comes to see Rambo one last time. Without saying much, she presses a small pendant into his hand, something personal, a quiet acknowledgement of whatever passed between them. Then she turns and follows the others inland. Rambo watches them disappear before steering the boat back down river alone. Along the way, he passes the wreckage of the pirate boats, drifting empty in the water. The image stays with him. Eventually he docks one of the captured boats somewhere remote, douses it in gasoline, and sets it on fire. He walks away as the flames swallow it, the explosion behind him sounding almost like an attempt to erase what he's done. At the same time, the volunteers push further inland and reach a small village, where they start handing out food and medicine, exactly the work they came to do. Michael gathers a group of children and, through a translator, shares a message of hope. Nearby, Sarah steps into a hut where a volunteer is tending to injured kids, casualties of the ongoing conflict, many of them permanently disabled. The reality of it hits her hard. This isn't an abstract mission anymore, it's real, and it's devastating. Then, without warning, it all falls apart. Mortars start raining down on the village, ripping through homes and sending people running in every direction. Sarah grabs a child and bolts for cover as explosions tear up the ground around them. Moments later, soldiers pour in, and what follows is pure carnage. Civilians gunned down without a second thought. Men, women, children, none of it discriminating. A group of survivors tries to make a break for open ground, but a mounted machine gun cuts them down before they get far. Sarah survives only by diving into the muddy rice paddies and staying frozen, playing dead while the massacre unfolds around her. When it's finally over, the village is nothing but ash. The surviving volunteers are rounded up and taken prisoner. From a distance, Lieutenant Tint watches the flames with something close to satisfaction. Elsewhere, Rambo sits alone, turning Sarah's pendant over in his fingers. Her words won't leave him alone. Not long after, the captured volunteers are hauled to a military camp and shoved into crude cages alongside another prisoner, a man called Pigsty, who's clearly been through far worse for far longer. Back in Thailand, Rambo bolts awake from a nightmare to find Arthur Marsha, the pastor from the Colorado church that organized the mission, standing over him with urgent news. The group is confirmed alive. A mixed force of mercenaries and Karen resistance fighters has assembled, but they need someone who actually knows the terrain. They need him. Rambo doesn't hesitate. Before setting out, he asks the pastor to pray, not just for the volunteers, but for what's coming. Then he gets to work the only way he knows how, forging weapons. By morning, he's ready, and he heads back into Burma, this time with a crew of hired mercenaries led by a man named Lewis. Their goal is simple: get the volunteers out. As they push upriver, tension simmers among the men, who openly criticize the volunteers for wandering into a war zone unprotected. Rambo just listens, saying nothing, even when Lewis tries to bait him into the conversation. One mercenary, Schoolboy, sizes him up and writes him off almost immediately. Just another burned-out veteran running on ego, he figures, mocking the idea that brute force will get the job done when brains should. Rambo doesn't bother responding. Back at the camp, Lieutenant Tint looks down through the slats of a holding structure at Sarah, caged below. She demands to know why they're being held, what any of this accomplishes. He offers nothing. His silence is as cold as everything else about him. Rambo and the mercenaries reach the same riverbank where the volunteers first landed, expecting a larger resistance force to greet them. Instead, only two people show up: a young man named Matt and a boy he insists is an outstanding tracker. It's a far cry from what they'd hoped for. Rambo offers to go in with the group, but Lewis shuts him down, ordering him to stay back and guard the boat while the rest push inland. Reluctantly, He stays behind. The squad follows Matt through the jungle and eventually reaches the ruins of the village the volunteers had visited. Homes reduced to ash, bodies scattered, silence where life used to be. The sight rattles the group, and some start questioning whether to continue at all, while others argue there's no turning back now. After some back and forth, Lewis makes the call. They'll move forward carefully, scout the base, and pull out at the first sign of trouble. Just then, an army truck rumbles into view. The squad ducks out of sight and watches soldiers drag civilians out and force them into a nearby field rigged with landmines. At the same cruel game as before, the mercenaries just watch, frozen. But someone doesn't sizz this one out. Rambo emerges out of nowhere, moving like a ghost, taking out the soldiers one by one with a bow. Silent, precise, no wasted motion. In moments, the threat is neutralized, and the surviving civilians scattered to freedom. Lewis is furious, accusing Rambo of jeopardizing the whole operation, and immediately tries to call it off. Rambo isn't having it. He confronts Lewis and makes it clear the mission is happening whether Lewis likes it or not. Lewis backs down. The team commandeers the army truck and pushes toward the base with Matt navigating. No more hesitation now. They're committed. Under cover of night and a heavy downpour, the team reaches the military compound. The plan: get in, find the prisoners, get out. 15 minutes total. Schoolboy climbs a tower for a clear sniper's view of the camp while Matt drives the stolen truck straight through the gate, past guards who don't think twice. Once inside, the team fans out. Most of the soldiers are distracted by a crude stage show, leaving parts of the camp thin on security and opening Rambo and the others use to start searching for the volunteers. What Rambo finds is horrific. One of the volunteers hanging dead from a wooden frame, mutilated, half-eaten by roaming pigs. The rest are barely alive, crammed into cages. He wastes no time freeing them, pulling Michael and another survivor out and telling them to stay hidden while he keeps searching for Sarah. Elsewhere in the camp, soldiers start harassing the female performers from the show, one of them dragging a terrified girl under a hut. Before it goes further, Diaz intervenes and kills the soldier. Around the same time, Rambo spots a boy being led toward Lieutenant Tint's quarters and, beneath the structure, another KJ Sarah's. He moves toward her immediately. The extraction is underway. From his perch, Schoolboy starts picking off guards to clear a path, and the squad begins moving the freed volunteers out. But just as Rambo closes in on Sarah, a soldier grabs her and drags her off. He pauses only a second before deciding. He tells Lewis to get the others moving and continues alone. Lewis hesitates, but over objections from Schoolboy and Michael, gives the order to retreat. Inside, the soldier is trying to overpower Sarah when Rambo appears, fast and silent, and ends the threat before it can go any further. Together, they try to slip out unnoticed, but two sentries spot them and raise their rifles. Before they can fire, precise shots take them both down. A Schoolboy, staying behind to cover the escape. The group pushes on toward the extraction point. By morning, the camp is in full alarm. Soldiers, vehicles, and tracker dogs pour out in pursuit. Moving through the jungle, Rambo stops briefly to help Sarah with her injured foot, keeping her moving despite the pain. Then disaster. Lewis steps on a hidden mine. The blast tears through the jungle and gives away their position, leaving Lewis with severe leg wounds. Michael rushes to help him. Rambo knows they can't outrun the army like this, so he makes a call. He'll split off with Sarah and Schoolboy to draw the pursuit away from the others. He tears a strip of fabric from Sarah's coat to use as a scent decoy, and Schoolboy fires a shot to make sure the soldiers follow. It works. Lieutenant Tint calls in reinforcements, including a patrol boat, and the dogs pick up Rambo's trail instead. Alone now, Rambo pushes deeper into the jungle and stumbles across an unexploded World War II-era bomb. Without missing a beat, he rigs a claymore to it and buries the whole thing under leaves and debris. When the pursuing soldiers reach the spot, the trap detonates a massive explosion that wipes out a large chunk of the force and forces the approaching boat to veer off, buying the others crucial time. Sarah and Schoolboy make it to the extraction point, but what's waiting for them is far worse than expected. The squad has been captured, lined up under guard with a mounted machine gun trained on them. Lieutenant Tinch steps forward, ready to execute them one by one. Just as the first shot is about to go off, Rambo comes tearing back into the fight, hijacking a nearby jeep and turning its mounted gun on the soldiers, unleashing total chaos. Gunfire breaks out from every direction. The squad grabs weapons and fights back, with Schoolboy providing cover fire from a distance with deadly accuracy. Lewis, wounded leg and all, pushes forward alongside Diaz until an explosion catches Diaz and kills him instantly. The battle keeps escalating. Lieutenant Tint cuts through the chaos and executes one of the volunteers outright, an act that finally breaks Michael's commitment to non-violence. When a soldier moves on Lewis, Michael kills him without hesitation. Just as the squad starts to buckle under pressure, reinforcements arrive. Karen resistance fighters, led by Mine, storming in and turning the tide of the fight. In the middle of it all, Lieutenant Tint tries to flee while an army boat opens fire with heavy weapons, knocking Rambo off the jeep. For a moment he's down, then he's back up. He destroys an incoming truck and turns his fire on the boat, killing its helmsman and throwing off its attack. Schoolboy takes out the boat's gunner, and Matt finishes it off with a rocket launcher. Spotting Tint trying to escape, Rambo goes after him. The chase doesn't last long. He catches up and ends it, brutally and without ceremony. With their commander dead and their ranks broken, the remaining soldiers retreat, and silence starts to return. Realizing it's over, Sarah runs toward the riverbank searching for Michael and finds him alive, tending to the wounded. They reunite, shaken but grateful to be alive, and go to thank Rambo for everything he's done. Time passes. Rambo leaves Burma and heads home to the United States, walking alone down a quiet road with a bag over his shoulder. Eventually he arrives somewhere familiar, his family's farm in Bowie, Arizona. For the first time in a long while, he's home. The atmosphere isn't just dark, it's suffocating. This film doesn't ask for your attention, it demands it. What makes the opening so effective is how deliberately it strips away any illusion of comfort. There's no glamour, no cinematic distance letting you watch safely from the sidelines. The imagery feels harsh, at times almost like a documentary. Brief, brutal glimpses of suffering, fear, and instability that set the emotional tone for everything to come. Before the first real action beat even hits, the film has already told you exactly what kind of world you're in, and that shapes how you experience everything that follows. So when Rambo finally shows up, he's not arriving as a hero stepping into danger, he's already standing on its edge, living a quiet, almost invisible existence, but still enveloped in the same atmosphere the opening established. The world hasn't changed, he's just trying not to be part of it anymore. That contrast matters. The opening isn't just setting a scene, it's building pressure, creating the sense that conflict is inevitable. You're not wondering if things will escalate, you're wondering when, and how far it'll go. So when the missionaries step into this world carrying hope and good intentions, the tension is immediate, because you already know what kind of story you're watching. That's the real accomplishment of the opening. It doesn't prepare you for adventure or heroics, it prepares you for confrontation. It sets a tone that's heavy, relentless, and deeply uneasy, telling you up front that nothing ahead will be simple, comfortable, or safe. By the time the story properly kicks off, the atmosphere has already done its job. You're not watching from a distance anymore, you're inside it. What makes Rambo 2008 so compelling, and at times so divisive, isn't just what it shows, it's what it can't seem to decide it wants to be. This is a film torn between two identities. On one side, there's a clear pull towards something more serious. You feel it in how the story's framed, the setting is grounded in real hardship, the mood is heavy, and Rambo himself is older, quieter, more reflective. This isn't the unstoppable action icon charging in for spectacle's sake. This feels like a man who understands what conflict costs and carries that weight with him. There are stretches where the film slows down just enough to hint at something deeper: morality, guilt, faith, the idea that confrontation might be something to endure rather than celebrate. In those moments, it almost feels like it's reaching back toward the emotional core of First Blood. But then it pivots, and suddenly everything shifts. The restraint disappears, the reflection gives way to spectacle, and the action stops being a tool and becomes the whole point. The scale grows, the intensity climbs, the confrontations get more extreme, and the film leans fully into the kind of unapologetic excess that defined the franchise's later entries. This is where the identity conflict becomes impossible to ignore, because the film never fully commits either way. It won't settle into being a thoughtful, grounded meditation on conflict, but it also won't fully surrender to being pure spectacle. Instead, it keeps oscillating, one moment asking you to sit with human suffering, the next inviting you to enjoy large-scale destruction, one moment presenting violence as tragedy, the next as release. That contradiction sits right at the center of the whole experience. For some viewers, that duality is exactly what makes the film work. It creates a tone heavier than a typical action movie while still landing with real visceral force, giving it an edge that separates it from more polished, sanitized blockbusters. For others, it feels uneven, because every time the film builds toward something meaningful, it interrupts itself with spectacle, and every time it goes all in on action, you can still feel the shadow of a more reflective movie underneath, straining to get through. It's almost like watching two different films pulling against each other on the same screen. And maybe that's exactly what makes Rambo 2008 memorable, not because it balances those identities perfectly, but because it doesn't. In that clash between reflection and intensity, between message and spectacle, you see the film wrestling not just with how to tell its story, but with what kind of story it even wants to be. If there's one thing about Rambo 2008 that's impossible to overlook, it's the sheer intensity of the action. Not just that it exists, but its scale, its force, its refusal to soften, cut away, or give you room to breathe. This isn't action where impacts happen quietly in the background. Every hit lands, every consequence registers, each confrontation is pushed to a level that borders on overwhelming, and that's clearly the intent. Because this film doesn't treat action as filler, it makes it the entire experience. From the opening minutes, the movie wields shock as a deliberate tool. It presents the suffering of civilians and the brutality of those in power in a way meant to unsettle. Nothing stylized, nothing heroic, just raw discomfort, and that discomfort is the point. The film is building pressure, cultivating frustration and helplessness in the audience. You're not simply watching these moments, you're being made to sit with them. Then the tone flips from tension to release. Once Rambo finally steps in, the intensity doesn't drop. If anything, it climbs. But now it's focused, controlled, channeled through a single force. What felt unbearable a moment ago suddenly feels cathartic, like the film has been building pressure inside you and is finally letting it go. That's why the action resonates with so many viewers. Not because it's clean or restrained, but because the film earns it through build-up. Then comes the turning point, where the action stops functioning as a storytelling tool and becomes the film's whole identity. It keeps escalating. Bigger confrontations, more destruction, higher stakes, until it crosses into something else entirely. Not necessarily worse, just different. At that point you're no longer reacting emotionally, you're reacting physically. The film shifts from expressing something to simply seeing how hard it can hit. For some viewers, that's exactly the appeal. For others, it's where the balance tips too far. What makes it even messier is how the film blends realism with exaggeration. On one hand, the action feels grounded, raw, almost documentary-like in its rawness. On the other, it's pushed so far it starts to feel larger than life, even surreal. That tension is core to the whole experience. Too intense to look away from, too exaggerated to fully buy into. too relentless to step back from once the finale hits. By the time the film reaches its peak, with Rambo pushing the confrontation to its absolute extreme, the action has become something beyond spectacle or shock. Its expression through scale, overwhelming, unapologetic, designed to leave a mark that doesn't fade easily. Whether you find it powerful, unsettling, thrilling, or excessive, one thing's certain: Rambo 2008 doesn't approach intensity with caution, it commits to it completely. Underneath all the large-scale action and chaos, Rambo 2008 keeps circling back to one question it never fully answers but also never lets go of: what's the right thing to do when doing nothing means people suffer? Because at its heart, this isn't just a rescue story, it's a collision between two fundamentally different worldviews. On one side, the missionaries believe in helping, in healing, in walking into danger armed with purpose instead of force. They bring aid, not aggression. Faith, not confrontation. To them, violence isn't just the wrong answer, it should never be an answer at all. On the other side is Rambo, a man who's lived through enough conflict to stop trusting ideals that don't survive contact with reality. His view of the world is simple: people hurt other people, and sometimes the only way to stop it is direct confrontation. That's the tension driving the whole story, not just presenting these two perspectives, but placing them side by side. You see it in the conversations, the hesitation, the way Rambo watches the missionaries almost as if he already knows how this ends. There's no anger in him, just certainty. And when everything collapses, that certainty turns out to be justified. But here's the key: the film doesn't frame his violence as triumph or as failure, just necessity. When Rambo finally acts, the response is overwhelming, decisive, final, and in the moment it feels like the only possible answer, because the threat is real and the suffering isn't abstract. And yet the film leaves something unresolved. Even when that response works, it doesn't fix anything deeper. It saves lives without reshaping the world. It ends the moment without breaking the cycle. That's where the moral tension lingers. Is Rambo right? Or is he simply necessary? Is force justified because it works? Or does it remain a problem even when it feels unavoidable? The missionaries embody hope, Rambo embodies reality, and the film refuses to fully pick a side. What makes this even more compelling is that Rambo himself never seems to take pride in what he does. There's no triumph, no celebration, just acceptance, as if he understands his actions aren't something to admire but something that has to happen anyway. This isn't a man discovering morality, it's a man who already understands it and knows the world doesn't always let you follow it. So when the story ends, it doesn't hand you a clean resolution, it leaves you sitting in the gap between what should be right and what actually works, between faith and survival, between the belief that force is wrong and the reality that sometimes it's the only thing standing between life and loss. And maybe that's the most honest thing the film does. It doesn't resolve the conflict, it just makes you carry it. The John Rambo in Rambo 2008 isn't the man you remember from the earlier films. He's older, slower in demeanor, if not in ability. The strength and precision are still there, but something heavier has settled over him: silence. This is a man who never escaped the war he fought, he simply carried it with him. When we first meet him, he's not leading missions or caught up in the middle of action. He's alone, living quietly by a river in Thailand, catching snakes and repairing boats, taking on work that demands no connection, no conversation, nothing beyond getting through another day. It reads as peace, but it doesn't feel like it, because this isn't a man who built a new life. This is a man who stepped out of his old one and never bothered replacing it. Conflict didn't leave Rambo, it took up residence inside him. What defines this version of the character isn't just his past, it's how he carries it. He barely speaks unless he has to. He never explains himself, never tries to be understood. It's not arrogance or mystery, it's distance, as though he's learned that connection only leads to loss, and silence is the safer option. But there's something even deeper in that isolation. It's not just that he wants to be alone, it's that he doesn't believe he belongs anywhere else. When the missionaries first ask for his help, his instinct is to refuse, not because he doesn't care, but because he understands exactly what they're walking into. He's lived it, survived it, and knows what they don't. Good intentions don't always hold up in places like that. So when he eventually says yes, it isn't a heroic moment, it's a reluctant one. And that reluctance tells you more about who he is than any speech could. Once the confrontations start, something shifts, not emotionally, but instinctively. Rambo doesn't transform into a hero, he reverts to what he already is: efficient, precise, unstoppable. There's no hesitation, no second guessing, because this is the one context where the world makes complete sense to him. Conflict isn't chaos for Rambo, it's clarity. He's built for high-stakes situations, and that's the most unsettling part of his character. Not that he's capable in extremes, but that he actually fits within them. Quiet life feels like a pause to him, not a destination. In danger, in crisis, in large-scale confrontation, he becomes exactly what he was shaped to be, and he knows it. What makes this portrayal work is what it deliberately avoids. There's no pride in what he does, no enjoyment, no sense of victory, just execution. He doesn't act because he wants to, he acts because when situations spiral, he's the one who knows how to end them. And that's not something to celebrate, just accept. This isn't a story about transformation, it's about realization. A man who tried to walk away from conflict only to discover it never let go of him. He isn't searching for purpose or trying to prove anything, he already knows exactly what he is. And that knowledge carries more weight than anything else he brings into the story. If John Rambo is the still center of this film, the supporting characters are the forces that keep pulling him back into motion. They're not just there to fill screen time, they each represent a different belief, a different way of facing the same brutal reality, and through them the film builds contrast. At the heart of the supporting cast are the missionaries, especially Sarah and Michael. They enter Burma armed with conviction rather than strategy or force, and that immediately puts them at odds with everything Rambo has learned. Michael in particular comes across as forceful, sometimes even too certain in his moral stance. He speaks with confidence, but that confidence occasionally feels disconnected from the world around him, as if he's trying to persuade reality rather than understand it. That's where his character becomes divisive. Instead of grounding the film's moral conflict, he sometimes seems to be pushing it too hard. The intent is clear, but the execution doesn't always land. Sarah, on the other hand, works not because she says more, but because she says less. Where others assert their beliefs, she simply carries hers, quietly and with a calm determination that never feels forced. More importantly, she connects with Rambo in a way that feels genuine. She doesn't try to change him, she understands him. That makes her the emotional bridge of the story, the one character who draws out something human in a man who's spent most of his life burying that part of himself. Once the rescue mission begins, a new group enters, the hired mercenaries, and they serve a very specific function. They're not there for deep character arcs, they're there for execution. Each one gets defined quickly through attitude, presence, and capability, and you understand who they are almost instantly. The leader stands out most: out, intense, overconfident to the point of exaggeration, bringing energy but not much subtlety. That's the pattern with this group: effective in motion, limited in depth, better when they're acting and reacting than when they're talking at length. The film is very clear about its moral alignment. You always know who's on which side, and there's no ambiguity in how characters are presented. The antagonists are harsh, defined almost entirely by their actions, with no attempt to soften them or add layers of complexity. That simplicity helps the story move quickly, but it also strips out nuance. Performance-wise, the film works best when actors lean on presence rather than dialogue. This isn't a movie driven by conversation, and whenever characters are handed extended exchanges, the cracks start to show. Lines can feel stilted, interactions unnatural. The more the film tries to define its characters through speech, the less convincing they become. But when they're silent, reacting, observing, enduring, the performances feel real. Ultimately, the supporting cast in Rambo 2008 isn't there to carry the film, it's there to reflect it. Some represent belief, some represent action, some simply embody the harsh reality everyone's moving through. Not all of them are fully realized, and not all of them feel authentic in every scene, but together they build the contrast that makes Rambo's presence hit even harder. For a film that lands such a powerful visual punch, Rambo 2008 has one clear weak point, and it shows up the moment characters open their mouths. This is a movie built for movement, tension, and silence, but the second it tries to explain itself through dialogue, something falters. Conversations meant to carry real weight, about morality, purpose, belief, often feel forced, not because the underlying ideas lack substance, but because the delivery lacks natural rhythm. Instead of people responding organically to a situation, it can feel like characters reciting positions, and that creates distance, and you stop paying attention to what's being said and start noticing how awkwardly it's being said. The film already tells its story visually, and does it well. You can sense the danger, see the stakes, understand the world without needing it explained. But then dialogue steps in and tries to underline everything anyway. Instead of trusting the audience, it spells out what's already obvious. Instead of deepening the characters, it flattens them, weakening moments that would have hit harder left unspoken. This gets even more noticeable during group scenes and character introductions, where instead of emerging naturally, some characters feel presented lined up and defined in a few quick, obvious strokes. You get their role instantly, but it doesn't feel earned. It's efficient without being immersive. You recognize the function without connecting to the person. There are also scenes clearly reaching for emotional depth, moments between Rambo and the missionaries hinting at inner conflict or vulnerability, but the dialogue doesn't always support that ambition. It reaches for meaning without quite sustaining it. So instead of pulling you in, those beats can feel a little distant, as if the emotion exists on paper but doesn't fully translate to the screen. Ironically, the film is at its strongest exactly when it goes quiet, when characters say less, when tension builds through movement instead of exposition, when reactions replace explanations. This is a film built on physical storytelling, not verbal storytelling. And it shows. Rambo 2008 doesn't struggle because it lacks ideas, it struggles because it tries too hard to spell them out. The themes and the weight are there, but the dialogue often gets in the way instead of reinforcing them. In a film this visually powerful, silence would have carried more impact. When Rambo 2008 stops explaining itself and starts moving, it becomes exactly what it was meant to be, because whatever problems it has with dialogue or structure, the action itself is undeniable, and not in a slick, choreographed way. It's raw, aggressive, almost overwhelming. This isn't combat designed to look elegant, it's designed to feel immediate. Every exchange is loud, chaotic, and intense. Explosions don't feel clean, they feel disruptive. The camera doesn't always offer perfect clarity, and that's intentional. It puts you inside the confusion rather than letting you observe it from a safe distance. You're not watching the action, you're inside it. What makes these sequences land is the buildup that precedes them. The film understands tension. There are stretches where everything slows down, movement turns careful, sound fades out, and characters communicate without saying a word. You feel the danger coming before you see it. The infiltration scenes especially are handled with real restraint. Watching characters creep through hostile territory knowing everything could collapse at any second, and when it finally does, the release is immediate. There are several set pieces where the film fully commits to scale ambushes, jungle traps, close quarters fights, explosive assaults, each one raising the stakes. But one sequence stands above the rest: Rambo behind a mounted machine gun. From that point on, the film stops holding anything back. What follows isn't subtle, isn't restrained, isn't even trying to feel grounded anymore. It's overwhelming, relentless, almost unbelievable in scale. And yet it works, because by then the film has built up enough pressure that the release feels earned. Even in the most chaotic stretches, there's structure underneath. The film never loses you. You can follow the movement, track where characters are positioned, Feel the progression of the fight. That's not easy to pull off in sequences this intense, and it's one of the film's strongest technical achievements. This isn't refined, precision-crafted action in the modern blockbuster mold. It's rough, loud, and relentless, and that's exactly why it stands out. It doesn't try to make confrontation look clean, it lets it feel immediate and unsettling and real. The action here isn't just spectacle, it's the language the film speaks best. Every explosion, every ambush, every beat of tension builds toward impact. And when it lands hard. One of the more noticeable things about Rambo 2008 is how uneven its rhythm feels, not because the film lacks direction, but because it takes its time getting where it's going and then arrives all at once. The first half moves slower and more deliberately than you might expect. We spend time with Rambo in isolation, with the missionaries, establishing the journey, the setting, the moral stakes. The film is clearly trying to build atmosphere and ground the story before the storm hits. But that build-up doesn't always flow smoothly, as some scenes linger longer than necessary. Dialogue stretches moments that could have been tighter, and the character interactions don't always carry enough weight to justify the time spent on them. Instead of tension building naturally, it can feel like the film is holding itself back, like something's coming but hasn't fully arrived yet. Then the shift happens. The moment the rescue mission truly kicks off, the pacing changes completely as the hesitation disappears, the focus sharpens, and the story stops setting up and starts moving. From there, momentum takes over, sequences connect rapidly, movement becomes constant, and the tension that felt distant earlier suddenly becomes unavoidable. It's no longer about setup, it's about execution, and this is where the film feels most confident, because the simplicity of the story finally works in its favor. No distractions, no overcomplication, just a straight line toward rescue, survival, escape. Then comes the final stretch, where the film fully commits. The intensity climbs, the restraint disappears entirely, and everything that had been building slowly releases at once. The final act doesn't just wrap up the story, it defines it, because this is the part people remember, not the setup, not the conversations, but the sheer force of what happens when everything finally lets go. So is this uneven pacing a flaw, or is it just how the film is built? In a way, it mirrors the story itself, a quiet, tense build-up followed by a sudden, overwhelming release. It's not smooth or perfectly balanced, but it does feel intentional. Rambo 2008 doesn't move like a traditional film, it builds slowly, sometimes clumsily, and then delivers with full force. The first half tests your patience. The second half rewards it, and by the end you realize the film was never trying to maintain a steady rhythm, it was building toward impact. One of the more debated aspects of Rambo 2008 is how it handles realism, because on the surface it feels grounded, set in a real conflict, portraying real hardship, opening with imagery that feels almost like a documentary. But as the story moves forward, that groundedness starts to shift. At first, everything feels heavy and believable. The environment is harsh, the stakes are serious, the danger constant, and the film presents Burma as a place where survival is genuinely uncertain and pressure never lets up. That grounding gives the story real weight and pulls you into the world without needing much explanation. Then the shift begins. Once the action takes over, the realism doesn't vanish, but it starts to stretch. Operations unfold with a little too much ease, timing gets suspiciously convenient, and the opposition doesn't always react in ways that feel consistent. Situations escalate quickly, sometimes without the resistance you'd expect, and gradually the film slides from grounded tension into heightened, cinematic logic. At the center of that shift is Rambo himself. Everything around him may still look realistic, but his presence changes the tone of the whole thing. He moves through danger with a level of efficiency that starts to feel almost superhuman, overcoming situations that would challenge anyone else. By the final act, he's not just confronting the threat, he's overwhelming it, and at that point the film isn't asking you to buy into realism anymore, it's asking you to accept a different kind of truth, a cinematic one where the logic starts to strain. Situations resolve faster than they should. The opposition overlooks things it realistically wouldn't. Plans succeed with less resistance than the setting implies. You start noticing the gaps, not because the film is hiding them, but because it's stopped trying to. For some viewers, that's where the experience starts to lose its footing. But the film never fully abandons its grounded tone either. The action still feels raw, the environment still feels dangerous, the consequences still feel physical. So you end up in a strange middle ground, grounded enough to feel serious, heightened enough to feel cinematic. And that's really the choice the film is making. It's not aiming for pure realism, it's aiming for impact, using realism to build the world and exaggeration to deliver the experience. If you go in expecting strict logic and accuracy, you'll spot the inconsistencies. But if you watch it understanding what it's actually doing, blending reality with myth, grounding with escalation, it becomes something else, not a perfect reflection of conflict, but an intensified version of it, built not just to show events but to make you feel them. On the surface, Rambo 2008 seems to be reaching for something bigger than pure action. It's not set in a fictional war or dealing with some abstract threat. It plants itself in a real-world conflict, Burma, and surrounds the story with imagery of displacement, hardship, and crisis that feels uncomfortably close to reality. That choice sets in expectation that the film might be trying to say something about conflict, about intervention, about morality. The question is how far it actually follows through. The film clearly wants its setting to feel serious. You see civilians caught in the crossfire, the consequences of war rippling far beyond the fighters themselves. An effort to frame this as more than just a battlefield, a humanitarian crisis. And in those moments, the film feels genuinely aware. But it doesn't linger there. Once the story shifts into rescue mode, the political backdrop fades into atmosphere rather than driving force. There's a common claim that this film carries an anti-war message, and in some ways it does. The violence isn't clean or traditionally heroic. There's no illusion of honor in it. The film presents conflict as chaotic, destructive, and overwhelming. But at the same time, this is also a movie that delivers some of the most intense, most memorable action in the entire franchise, and that's the contradiction. It shows you the cost of confrontation, then builds its most crowd-pleasing moments around exactly that confrontation. Part of what limits the political dimension is how clearly the film draws its lines. You always know who the good guys are and who the villains are. There's no ambiguity. The antagonists are defined almost entirely by their brutality. The victims are unambiguously innocent, and the moral boundaries are drawn quickly and firmly. That clarity keeps the story moving, but it also strips out any real complexity, and the film never asks why the conflict exists in the first place. It shows you what it looks like and moves on. You can feel the ambition to be more than an action film. It raises ideas about morality, intervention, the cost of standing by, but it never stays with those ideas long enough to really dig into them. It touches on depth, then pulls back toward movement and spectacle. So the ambition is real, but the follow-through is limited. In the end, Rambo 2008 doesn't become a political film. It becomes a film set inside a political reality, and that's an important distinction. It uses the conflict to build urgency, uses hardship to raise the stakes, uses realism to give its action weight, but it doesn't fully engage with the deeper questions underneath. Is it anti-war? Sometimes in tone, partly in message, somewhat in execution, but not completely. It shows you the harshness of conflict while also delivering the thrill of pushing back against it. It raises questions it doesn't stick around to answer, and maybe that's the honest truth of it. This isn't a film trying to explain conflict, it's trying to show you what it feels like, and leaving the interpretation up to you. Looking at Rambo 2008 as a directed film rather than just an action vehicle, one thing becomes clear fast. Sylvester Stallone understands how to show things far better than he understands how to say them, and that distinction defines the entire viewing experience. This is a film built on visual storytelling rather than dialogue or speeches. When it leans on movement, framing, and atmosphere, it works. You see it in the jungle, in the river sequences, In the quiet stretches right before tension breaks, there are long passages with almost no dialogue at all, and yet everything registers clearly. The danger, the tension, the emotion, all communicated without a word. Those are the moments where Stallone shows real command as a director. Directing action at this scale isn't easy. A rapid movement, explosions, multiple characters shifting position. It's the kind of thing that can quickly become visually incoherent. But here, even amid the chaos, there's structure. You always understand where people are and what's unfolding, and that clarity isn't accidental. It's direction. Some of the film's best sequences skip dialogue entirely. Infiltration scenes, movement through hostile territory, characters reacting instead of talking. These moments feel focused and alive because the film trusts its own visuals. It doesn't need to explain fear when it can show it. Doesn't need to describe danger when it can put you inside it. That's where Stallone's direction is strongest. Where it slips is the moment the film leans into dialogue-heavy scenes. Stallone can build a powerful visual sequence, but shaping emotional exchanges between characters is far less consistent. Conversations feel stiff, scenes lose rhythm, the energy drains out. It's not that the intent isn't there, the execution just doesn't always match it. Stallone directs with force, not finesse. Direct, immediate, uncomplicated, showing you exactly what's happening and doing it with intensity rather than subtlety. And for a film like this, that approach mostly fits. There's a clear pattern. When the story's carried visually, the film is strong. When it leans on dialogue, it weakens. That's the trade-off. A powerful imagery and impactful sequences, but less depth in character work and emotional nuance. Stallone isn't chasing elegance here, he's chasing effectiveness. And in Rambo 2008, that effectiveness comes almost entirely from visual storytelling. The film may not be the most refined or emotionally layered, but when it comes to conveying tension, movement, and confrontation, he knows exactly where to put the camera and when to pull the trigger. If there's one element that quietly elevates Rambo 2008 beyond its raw intensity, it's how the film looks. Beyond the action and chaos, there's a visual world here that feels immersive, grounded, and constantly alive. The jungle isn't just a backdrop, it's a presence. It feels dense, heavy, almost suffocating. The greenery thick and shadowy rather than vibrant or comforting. You don't feel like you are observing nature from a distance, you feel like you are inside something that could close in on you at any moment. That matters, because it turns the environment itself into a source of tension. Every tree is potential cover, every shadow a possible threat, every path uncertain. The film doesn't just place characters in danger, it surrounds them with it. What makes the cinematography even more striking is the contrast baked into it. On one hand, the landscapes are genuinely beautiful, wide rivers, open terrain, natural light filtering through the canopy, a raw authenticity that grounds the film visually. On the other, that beauty keeps getting interrupted by violence, sudden bursts of action shattering the stillness. The environment itself never changes, but what happens within it does, and that contrast is a constant reminder that even the most untouched places can become zones of crisis. There's a physical texture to the visuals, and you can almost feel the humidity, the mud, the heat. Nothing here looks polished or overly stylized, it looks rough and immediate. And that texture adds weight to everything. When characters move, you feel the effort. When they hide, you feel the tension. When action erupts, it feels tied directly to the space around it. The way scenes are shot deepens that immersion further. The camera doesn't sit at a distance, it moves with the action, at times feeling unsteady, almost handheld, like it's reacting to events rather than controlling them, which creates a strong sense of immediacy. You're not watching from a safe remove, you're placed right inside the environment. Even in the most intense sequences, the cinematography never loses its grip. Despite the rapid movement and heavy action, you can always follow what's happening as the geography of each scene stays clear, and you understand where people are and where the threats are coming from. That balance between chaos and clarity is genuinely difficult to pull off, and here it holds throughout. The cinematography does more than make Rambo 2008 look striking, it makes the world feel real. The jungle isn't just scenery, it's part of the tension, part of the atmosphere, part of the conflict itself. Because of that, every moment, a quiet or explosive, carries more weight, and you don't just see this world, you feel enclosed in it. When people discuss Rambo 2008, the conversation usually gravitates toward its intensity, but what really gives that intensity its force is the technical craftsmanship behind it. This isn't a film that simply presents action, it builds it layer by layer. The effects walk a careful line between physical impact, a tangible, grounded, immediate, and digital enhancement that pushes everything further, making moments bigger, louder, more extreme. Most of the time, that combination works. Explosions feel heavy, action feels forceful, and damage is never just implied, it's plainly visible. The effects don't downplay intensity, they amplify it. That said, there are moments where the digital layer becomes noticeable, where realism softens and spectacle takes over more visibly, and depending on the viewer, that can either deepen the experience or create distance from it. If the visuals grab your eyes, the sound grabs everything else. Every shot doesn't just register as loud, it carries weight. Explosions don't simply mark an event, they resonate through the whole scene, and there's a real physical quality to the sound design that intensifies every sequence. It's not background noise, it's part of the experience. In quieter moments, that same sound design flips its function. Silence builds tension, ambient noise creates unease, and the film clearly knows when to overwhelm you and when to hold back. The score supports the film without ever overpowering it, building tension, adding momentum, reinforcing emotion exactly where needed without pulling focus from what's on screen. When the intensity climbs, the music follows. When the film slows, the score gives it room to breathe. It's subtle, but it works. One of the film's most impressive technical achievements is how it manages complexity, multiple characters, overlapping movement, fast-paced sequences unfolding from several directions at once, and yet it rarely becomes confusing. You can follow the flow, track the stakes, and keep pace with what's happening in real time. That level of control on sequences this chaotic is no small feat. At a certain point, the technical elements stop simply supporting the film and start defining it. The way the action is captured, cut, and delivered becomes the film's actual identity. Sound, effects, pacing, all working together toward one goal: impact. Rambo 2008 isn't a subtle piece of filmmaking, it's loud, direct, and intense. But underneath that intensity is a level of technical control that keeps it all cohesive. The effects push boundaries, the sound gives every moment weight, and the execution keeps the chaos from tipping into confusion. Because of that, when the film delivers, it doesn't just look powerful, it feels powerful. When Rambo 2008 arrived nearly 2 decades after the previous installment, it wasn't just another sequel, it was a return, bringing back a character who'd already become a cultural symbol, reviving a franchise that helped define an entire era of action cinema, and carrying with it something to prove. This is, after all, the 4th chapter in a legacy that started with First Blood, a film that wasn't just action, but a character study about trauma, identity, and a man struggling to find his place after war. The sequels that followed grew bigger and louder, transforming Rambo from a wounded veteran into something closer to a mythic figure. So this film steps into 2 very different sets of expectations. Some viewers want the emotional depth of the original, others want the scale of the sequels, and Rambo 2008 tries to deliver a bit of both. It's not a complete return to roots, but you can feel the film reaching back. There's a seriousness here, a darker tone, a version of Rambo closer to the man from First Blood, older, quieter, more burdened. At the same time, it doesn't abandon what the franchise became. The scale is still there, the intensity is still there, Rambo is still essentially unstoppable. Instead of choosing a direction, the film blends both, honoring where the character started without forgetting what made him iconic. And yet something does feel different, not just in tone but in presence. There's a noticeable absence in this chapter, a figure who once grounded Rambo, balanced him, gave him someone to answer to. Without that presence, This version feels more isolated than ever, not just physically but emotionally. There's no one guiding him, no one challenging him, no one holding him back. He exists entirely on his own terms. What sets this film apart within the franchise is that it doesn't try to reinvent Rambo for modern sensibilities or reshape him to fit changing trends. It just brings him back as he is and drops him into a world that feels harsher and more unforgiving. And that contrast works, and it proves the character still belongs, even after all this time, for our longtime fans of the original trilogy. There's plenty here that feels familiar: the tone, the structure, Rambo's presence itself, but it doesn't rely purely on nostalgia. It stands as a direct, self-contained story that newcomers can follow without needing the history, even though that history adds weight for those who have it. Ultimately, Rambo 2008 isn't just about resurrecting a character, it's about showing what's left after time has passed, what's changed, what hasn't, and what never will. It doesn't fully recapture the emotional depth of the original, and it doesn't fully embrace the scale of the sequels either. Instead, it exists somewhere in between, a bridge between legacy and identity, and in doing that, it proves something important. John Rambo didn't just belong to the past, he outlasted it. Before you press play on Rambo 2008, there's one thing worth knowing up front: the film knows exactly what it is, and more importantly, exactly who it's for. If you're expecting a richly layered war drama, a nuanced political examination, or a character study built on subtle emotional shifts, you'll likely feel the disconnect fast. The film touches on those elements, but they aren't what drive it. This isn't a movie built on nuance, it's built on impact. This is a film for viewers craving intensity, not just action, but action you feel. It's for audiences who appreciate raw, unfiltered storytelling, who don't need polished choreography or a softened presentation, who understand that sometimes a film prioritizes experience over explanation. If you grew up on the earlier Rambo films, this will feel familiar but sharper and more direct. If you're drawn to high-stakes, relentless tension that never lets up, this is squarely your kind of movie. At the same time, it's clearly not designed for everyone. If graphic imagery is difficult for you, this will be a rough watch. If you prefer emotional depth over physical intensity, it may feel thin. And if you're looking for tidy moral resolution or a reflective ending, the film simply doesn't offer one, nor does it try to. What stands out most is how firmly the film commits to its own identity. It doesn't soften its tone to widen its appeal or adjust its content to feel more accessible. It stays exactly what it set out to be from start to finish. Rather than chasing a broad audience, it fully commits to delivering a specific experience. That's really the crux of it. Your experience with this film depends entirely on what you bring to it. Expect depth, and you'll notice the gaps. Expect intensity, and you'll recognize where it excels. The film itself doesn't change, your perspective does. Rambo 2008 isn't trying to win you over or bend to your expectations. It presents itself plainly and lets you decide. If you're ready for something intense, direct, and uncompromising, you'll find exactly what you came for. If not, this probably isn't the film for you. Strip away the debates, the contradictions, and the sheer intensity, and Rambo 2008 still stands on something solid, because for all its flaws, it has genuine strengths, and when it leans into them, it's highly effective. The most obvious is the action itself. It's not polished or modern blockbuster smooth, it's raw, forceful, almost overwhelming. Every sequence hits heavy and direct, and the film never eases off once it builds momentum. When it reaches its peak, it produces moments that are hard to shake. This is action built to hit, not just entertain, and it succeeds. What strengthens the action further is the build-up behind it. The film understands anticipation, knowing exactly when to slow down and let tension form so the release, when it comes, feels earned. That balance between setup and payoff is one of the film's genuine strengths. At the center of it all is Rambo himself, older, quieter, more controlled. You don't need speeches or dramatic monologues to understand him. His presence alone carries the weight. You believe in what he does not because it's spelled out, but because it's consistent with who he is, and that restraint makes the character genuinely compelling. Visually, the film is a standout. The jungle feels alive and unpredictable. The cinematography pulls you in rather than holding you at arm's length. It's textured and grounded rather than overly stylized, giving the whole film a sense of authenticity even as the action becomes more heightened. And despite how intense things get, the film rarely loses coherence, and you can follow the movement, understand the stakes, and stay connected to what's happening even in the most chaotic stretches. That level of control and sequences this aggressive is a real strength. Above all, the film's greatest asset might be its clarity of purpose. It doesn't hesitate, dilute itself, or try to be something it's not. From tone to execution, it stays consistent with its own vision, and that kind of commitment, even when it divides opinion, carries real power. After years away, resurrecting a character like Rambo could easily have felt unnecessary, but here it doesn't. The film gives him a reason to return that fits his journey, and even with a simple story, his presence still carries meaning. It feels like a continuation, not just a comeback. Rambo 2008 isn't perfect, but when it works with real force through its action, its atmosphere, its central character, and its total commitment to intensity. It builds an experience that stays with you, not because it's subtle, but because it's undeniable. For everything Rambo 2008 gets right, its weaknesses are just as hard to ignore. At its core, the story is simple, too simple. The setup is strong. But once the rescue mission kicks off, the plot becomes more of a scaffold than a driving force. It doesn't evolve much or surprise you and moves forward without deepening. The film isn't built around storytelling so much as execution, and that leaves the narrative feeling thin. Dialogue is where the film struggles most. Conversations often feel forced, lines don't always flow naturally, and emotional beats get explained rather than genuinely experienced. Instead of adding depth, the dialogue sometimes strips it away. The ideas underneath are strong, but something gets lost whenever characters try to voice them, and it shows. Outside of Rambo, most of the supporting characters exist with limited depth. They're defined quickly and clearly, but not fully. You understand their function without understanding their layers. Some feel exaggerated, others underdeveloped, and few leave much of an impression beyond serving the plot. The pacing isn't seamless either. The first half moves slowly without quite earning that pace with enough depth, and the second half accelerates so sharply it leaves that earlier restraint behind entirely. The result is a film that feels stretched in one half and compressed in the other, with a transition that isn't especially smooth. The realism the film establishes early on doesn't hold steady either. As the intensity rises, the internal logic starts to bend. Situations resolve too conveniently, the opposition doesn't always behave believably, and while the intensity never lets up, the sense of believability gradually erodes. There's also a point where the action, impactful as it is, outpaces what the story can actually support, not just in scale, but in sheer frequency. Eventually it stops reinforcing the narrative and starts overwhelming it, tipping from tension into overload, which for some viewers can dull emotional engagement rather than heighten it. And finally, the film raises real questions about morality, belief, and the role of force in extreme situations, but never stays with them long enough to fully explore them. It approaches depth and then moves past it, leaving you with fragments that are thought-provoking but incomplete. Rambo 2008 knows how to deliver impact, but not always how to support it. Its weaknesses come less from a lack of effort than from imbalance. Too much emphasis on action, not enough on what surrounds it. That doesn't undercut the experience entirely, but it does keep the film from becoming something more complete. So when the intensity fades and the atmosphere finally clears, what is Rambo 2008, really? It's a film of contradictions. Not clean, not balanced, not subtle, and it never pretends otherwise. It's pulled in two directions at once, between meaning and spectacle, between reflection and raw intensity, between showing the harshness of conflict and delivering the release of fighting back against it. Rather than choosing one, It carries both. There are moments where the film seems to reach for something deeper. You see it in the setting, in Rambo himself, in the questions it quietly raises, but it never fully becomes that version of itself, because every time it edges toward depth, it turns back toward intensity. In doing so, it defines itself less by what it explains and more by what it makes you feel. This isn't a film you spend the whole runtime analyzing. It's one you experience. The tension, the weight, the silence, the sudden bursts of violence. It stays with you not because of layered complexity, but because of its sheer force. And at the center of it all is a character who hasn't changed so much as grown heavier, older, more worn, more self-aware. This isn't a hero trying to prove himself, it's a man who already understands exactly what he is and what the world demands of him, and that realization gives the film its quiet weight. Rambo 2008 is far from perfect, it stumbles with dialogue, it simplifies where it could explore, but when it commits to what it does best, it delivers something genuinely memorable.